Welcome back to Lesson by Lesson, A Course in Miracles. Yesterday, we dove into Lesson 70. It encouraged us to look beyond superficial differences and recognize the shared spark of divinity within everyone. So today, we're moving on to Lesson 71. Only God's plan for salvation will work.
It is interesting how this lesson builds upon the previous one. Yesterday, we were focusing on recognizing our shared identity. And today we're exploring how aligning with a higher power can help us transcend the limitations of our individual ego-driven plans.
You know, I've always struggled with this idea of God's plan. It feels a bit predetermined, like I don't have a say in my own life. But I'm guessing that's not quite what the Course is getting at.
You're right, it's not about fatalism or passivity. The Course uses the term salvation in a broader sense, referring to true happiness and fulfillment. It's suggesting that lasting peace comes not from forcing our own limited will, but from aligning with a wisdom that's beyond our individual understanding.
So it's less about following a specific blueprint and more about trusting in a larger unfolding that we can't fully grasp with our limited human minds.
Exactly. The lesson emphasizes that our personal plans, often fueled by fear and a desire for control, can actually lead us further away from the peace and happiness we seek.
Okay, I can see that. How many times have I meticulously planned something out, only to have it completely fall apart, leaving me feeling frustrated and disappointed? But if I'm not supposed to rely on my own plans, does that mean I should just sit back and do nothing?
Not at all. This is where the idea of active surrender comes in. It's not about giving up or becoming passive, but about consciously choosing to cooperate with what you perceive as the divine will. Think of it like this. Instead of trying to row your boat upstream against the current, you're adjusting your sails to harness the power of the wind.
That's a helpful analogy.
Yeah.
So how do we even begin to distinguish between our ego-driven plans and this idea of God's plan? How do we know when we're clinging too tightly to our own limited perspective?
The lesson suggests paying attention to our inner experience. Are our plans fueled by fear, anxiety, or a need to control? Or are they coming from a place of peace, love, and a desire to serve a purpose that's bigger than ourselves?
So it's about becoming more aware of our motivations and the underlying feelings that are driving our choices. But how do we actually make that shift from my will be done to thy will be done? It seems like a pretty big leap.
It is a shift in perspective, but it can happen gradually, one choice at a time. The lesson encourages us to start with small, everyday situations. For example, instead of getting caught up in a power struggle and a minor disagreement, can you choose to step back and see the situation from a more compassionate perspective?
So it's about those little moments of choice where we can practice letting go of the need to be right or to control the outcome.
Exactly. And each time we choose surrender over ego, we strengthen that muscle of trust. And we become a little bit more aligned with what the Course calls God's plan.
This is starting to make more sense to me. But what about those big life decisions? Career choices, relationships, major life changes. How do we apply this principle when the stakes feel so much higher?
The same principles apply, but it might require a deeper level of surrender and trust. It might involve asking for guidance through prayer or meditation, paying attention to synchronicities and intuitive nudges, and being willing to let go of outcomes that no longer serve our highest good. Sometimes, that means making choices that seem counterintuitive, or even scary to our ego.
That can definitely be a challenge. It's like taking a leap of faith into the unknown. But you're saying that it's in those moments of surrender that we open ourselves up to possibilities that we couldn't have orchestrated on our own.
Precisely. When we let go of our rigid grip on how things should be, we create space for something new and unexpected to emerge.
So instead of approaching those big decisions with a sense of fear and anxiety, we try to cultivate an attitude of trust and openness, knowing that we're being supported and guided, even if we can't see the full picture.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from what if it doesn't work out to what if this is leading me somewhere amazing that I could never have imagined.
That's a really powerful reframing. It reminds me of that quote, "Leap and the net will appear."
I love that quote, and it speaks to the essence of this lesson. We're not being asked to blindly leap into the abyss. We're being invited to trust that there's a deeper intelligence at work, a guiding force that is always supporting our journey, even when we can't see the path ahead.
It's about cultivating that faith that we're not alone, that we're held and guided, even in the midst of uncertainty.
Beautifully put. And that faith, that trust in something bigger than ourselves, is what allows us to surrender our limited perspective and embrace the infinite possibilities of God's plan.
This has been incredibly helpful. It's like you've given me a new lens through which to view those challenging moments when I feel like I'm banging my head against a wall, trying to force things to go my way.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, it's a process, not a destination. We're all learning to surrender and trust a little bit more each day.
I appreciate that reminder.
Okay.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, exploring the idea of God's plan and the importance of surrendering our ego-driven plans.
We have. We've talked about the difference between active surrender and passive resignation, the importance of paying attention to our motivations and underlying feelings, and how to apply these principles in both small, everyday situations and those big life decisions that can feel so overwhelming.
Before we wrap up part 1 of this deep dive, I'm curious to hear more about the practical applications of this lesson. Are there specific exercises or practices that we can use to integrate this idea of surrender into our daily lives?
Absolutely. The course offers a wealth of practical tools for putting these teachings into action. One simple but powerful practice is to start each day with a conscious intention to surrender your will to the will of God.
So it's like setting the tone for the day, reminding ourselves that we're not in control and that we're choosing to trust in a higher power.
Exactly. And you can reinforce this intention throughout the day by pausing in those moments of challenge or decision making and asking for guidance, reminding yourself that you're not alone, and choosing to surrender your ego's need to control the outcome.
That makes sense. It's like we're creating a habit of surrender, training our minds to let go of the reins and trust in the unfolding of a plan that's bigger than ourselves.
Precisely. And as we cultivate this habit, we'll start to notice that life flows with more ease and grace. We'll feel less resistant to change, more accepting of what is, and more aligned with our true purpose.
I love that idea. Okay, so we've got this daily practice of setting an intention to surrender and then reminding ourselves throughout the day to let go and trust. What other tools does the course offer for integrating this lesson?
Well, another powerful practice is to use affirmations to reinforce the idea of surrender and trust. Affirmations are positive statements that we repeat to ourselves, either silently or out loud, to reprogram our subconscious minds.
I've heard of affirmations, but I've never really used them consistently. What kind of affirmations would be helpful for this lesson?
Anything that resonates with the idea of letting go of control and trusting in a higher power, for example. You could try repeating affirmations like, I surrender my will to the will of God, or I trust that I am guided and supported, even when I can't see the path ahead.
Those are beautiful. I can already feel a sense of peace just hearing them. Do you have any tips for actually incorporating affirmations into my daily routine?
The key is consistency. Choose a few affirmations that resonate with you and repeat them regularly, ideally several times a day. You can write them down, say them out loud while looking in the mirror, or simply repeat them silently to yourself throughout the day.
So it's about finding a way to integrate them into our lives in a way that feels natural and sustainable.
Exactly. And as you repeat these affirmations, try to really feel the truth of the words. Allow them to sink into your subconscious mind and start to shift your beliefs and perceptions.
That makes sense. It's like we're planting seeds of surrender and trust in the fertile ground of our minds.
Beautifully put. And as we nurture those seeds with consistent practice, they'll eventually blossom into a life that's more aligned with our true purpose and filled with a deeper sense of peace and joy.
This has been so insightful. I'm already feeling more inspired to put these teachings into practice.
I'm glad to hear that. Remember, it's a journey, not a destination. We're all learning and growing together.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into Lesson 71. We've explored the concept of God's plan, the importance of surrendering our ego-driven plans, and some practical tools for integrating these teachings into our daily lives.
We've talked about the difference between active surrender and passive resignation, the role of fear and ego in our decision-making, and the power of using affirmations and daily intentions to cultivate a mindset of trust and surrender.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve deeper into the role of forgiveness in surrendering to God's plan, and explore how these principles can transform our relationships and our overall experience of life.
We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back to our deep dive into Lesson 71. Before we went to break, we were talking about practical ways to cultivate surrender, like setting daily intentions and using affirmations. But there's another key aspect of this lesson that I find particularly fascinating.
I have a feeling you're talking about forgiveness. It's a theme that pops up a lot in A Course in Miracles,
Yeah.
but it's also one of the most challenging concepts to put into practice, especially when we've been hurt or wronged.
It absolutely is. But Lesson 71 suggests that forgiveness is an essential part of surrendering to God's plan. You see, when we hold on to anger, resentment, or blame, We're clinging to our own limited perspective. Our egos need to be right. And that can block us from experiencing the peace and freedom that come with surrender.
So forgiveness isn't about condoning the other person's actions or letting them off the hook. It's about freeing ourselves from the burden of carrying around that resentment and anger.
That's a great way to put it. Think of it this way. When you hold on to anger towards someone, you're essentially giving them power over your emotional well-being. You're allowing their past actions to continue to hurt you in the present moment.
Wow. I never thought of it that way. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Right. Exactly. Forgiveness is the antidote to that poison. It's about reclaiming your power and choosing peace over suffering. It's a gift you give yourself.
I love that analogy. But it's one thing to understand forgiveness intellectually. It's another thing to actually put it into practice, especially when the wounds run deep. Where do we even begin?
It starts with a simple choice, a willingness to let go, a willingness to release the need to be right, the need to punish, the need to hold on to that story of victimhood. And it's a process, not a one-time event. We might need to choose forgiveness over and over again, especially with those deep-seated hurts.
That resonates with me. I remember when I was going through a painful breakup, I kept replaying all the things my ex had done wrong, all the ways I had been hurt. It was like a broken record in my mind.
We've all been there. And those thought patterns can be so deeply ingrained. But that's where awareness comes in. The first step is simply noticing when you're holding on to resentment or anger.
So instead of getting lost in the story of what happened, we can just observe those thoughts and feelings without judgment.
Precisely. And then we can gently start to shift our perspective. Instead of focusing on the other person and their actions, we can bring our attention inward to our own thoughts and feelings.
And from that place of self-awareness, we can start to ask ourselves, what would it feel like to release this anger? What would it feel like to choose peace instead of this suffering?
That's a beautiful way to frame it. And remember, forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the other person's actions. It's about recognizing that they too are on their own journey. And we all make mistakes.
It's about remembering that we're all interconnected, we're all flawed, and we're all deserving of compassion.
Exactly. And that includes ourselves. Often, the person we need to forgive most is ourselves. We hold on to guilt, shame, and regret for past mistakes. And those feelings can block us from experiencing the fullness of God's love and grace.
So forgiveness is not just about letting go of anger towards others. It's also about releasing ourselves from the prison of self-judgment.
Beautifully put. And when we can practice forgiveness, both towards ourselves and others, we create space for healing and transformation.
It's like we're clearing the path for God's plan to unfold more smoothly in our lives.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of forgiveness. It aligns us with the highest good, allowing us to experience the transformative power of love and grace.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Lesson 71. We've been talking about this idea of surrendering to a higher plan, but it can feel kind of abstract. How does this actually play out in our daily lives? How does letting go of control actually work when we're facing real-world challenges and decisions?
That's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? It's one thing to grasp these concepts intellectually, but quite another to actually live them.
Exactly. So let's talk about how we can bridge that gap. We've already touched on practical tools like setting intentions and affirmations, but how do we apply those in the context of, say, our careers or relationships? These are areas where it feels especially hard to let go of the reins.
You're right. Those are areas where we often have strong attachments and expectations, which makes surrender feel risky. But here's the thing. The more we cling to control in these areas, the more likely we are to experience frustration, disappointment, and even burnout.
Because we're constantly fighting against the natural flow of things, trying to force outcomes instead of trusting the process.
Exactly. Think about it in terms of your career. If you're fixated on a specific job title, salary, or company, you might miss out on opportunities that are a better fit for your skills and passions, even if they don't initially appear to align with your plan.
So instead of approaching our careers with a rigid, outcome-oriented mindset, we can shift our focus to aligning our actions with our values and purpose,
Yeah?
trusting that the right opportunities will unfold.
That's the idea. It's about asking yourself, what kind of work brings me joy? What are my unique gifts and talents? How can I use those to make a positive contribution to the world?
It's almost like we're becoming co-creators with the universe,
Right.
setting intentions, putting in the effort, but also trusting that there's a larger intelligence guiding our path.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about being passive or giving up on our goals. It's about approaching them with a different mindset, a mindset of surrender. trust, and openness to possibilities that might be beyond our current understanding.
I like that. So how does this apply to relationships? It seems like letting go of control in that area could be particularly challenging, especially if we've experienced hurt or disappointment in the past.
You're absolutely right. Our hearts are often guarded, and we can carry a lot of baggage from past relationships. But that's where forgiveness becomes so crucial.
Because holding on to resentment and anger can block us from creating healthy, loving relationships in the present.
Exactly. And it can also prevent us from seeing people clearly, from recognizing their potential for growth and change.
So how do we apply forgiveness in the context of our relationships, especially those that might be challenging or even toxic?
It starts with recognizing that everyone, including ourselves, is doing the best they can with the understanding they have at any given moment. It
Boy,
doesn't mean condoning hurtful behavior, but it does mean choosing compassion over judgment.
that's a powerful reminder.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in blame and resentment, especially when we feel hurt or betrayed. But ultimately, that just keeps us stuck in the past.
Exactly. Forgiveness is about releasing those negative emotions and creating space for healing, both within ourselves and in our relationships.
And sometimes that healing might mean letting go of a relationship that's no longer serving our highest good.
Absolutely. Surrender doesn't always mean staying in a situation that's causing us pain. It can also mean having the courage to walk away with love and compassion, trusting that we're being guided towards something better.
This is so helpful. I feel like we're starting to connect the dots between surrender, trust, and forgiveness in a way that feels more tangible and applicable to everyday life.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, it's an ongoing process. There will be times when we fall back into old patterns of control and resistance. But each time we catch ourselves, we have an opportunity to choose a different path.
So it's cultivating those moments of awareness, making conscious choices, and trusting that we're being supported every step of the way.
Beautifully put. It's about surrendering the illusion of control and embracing the adventure of living in alignment with a wisdom that's far greater than our own.
This has been such an enlightening deep dive into Lesson 71. We've covered so much ground, from understanding the concept of God's plan to exploring the practical applications of surrender, trust, and forgiveness in our careers, relationships, and overall approach to life.
It's been a privilege to explore these ideas with you. I hope our listeners feel empowered to integrate these teachings into their own lives and discover the peace, joy, and fulfillment that come from aligning with a higher purpose.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for joining us. Please like, share, and subscribe. See you tomorrow.